Hello students, hope you're fine. Today we're going to talk about regulation of female sexual hormone, and this video is only an introduction. We're going to have a quick outline talking about the endocrine system, and then we're going to specify some endocrine structures and some endocrine hormones directly involved in menstruation. System of controls, we've got two systems of controls in our body, nervous system and endocrine system. They both respond to internal and external stimulus and help maintain our homeostasis and help us adapt to changes in our environments. When we talk about endocrine system, we remember the endocrine glands that secrete the hormones into blood, but I want you to pay attention that it also consists of cells that are able to secrete hormones and have an endocrine function. These cells are found in some organs like hypothalamus, stomach, small intestine, kidney, liver, heart, placenta, pancreas, and adipose tissue. This picture shows most of the endocrine glands. We're not going to talk about all, we're just going to talk about the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and the ovaries. So see, the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland are found in the head. To start with, I'm going to differentiate exocrine and endocrine glands. Exocrine glands, they produce products in two ducts, while the endocrine glands are ductless. They secrete their hormones directly into blood. That's why endocrine glands are highly vascularized, which is rich in blood capillaries. So some examples of exocrine gland are like sweat glands, digestive and mucus glands. However, endocrine glands, when I say secrete their hormones into blood, they are first secreted into the fluid around the gland called interstitial fluid, and then from there it goes to the blood capillaries, and from the blood capillaries it joins the blood to target cells. Talking about target cells, they should have special receptors so that the hormone will modify or cause changes on this target cell, specifically similar to the nervous system where neurotransmitters cause changes on the postsynaptic membrane by binding to receptors there. So it's just the same thing. However, receptors of the postsynaptic membrane are found in the postsynaptic membrane. However, receptors of hormones could be found in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus or on the cell membrane, and that depends on the type of hormones. I'm not going to go into deep details. I'm just going to mention that there are two types or two groups of hormones, lipid soluble and water soluble. The lipid soluble hormones like steroid hormones, estrogen and progesterone for example, have the receptors in the cytoplasm or in the nucleus. However, water soluble hormones, example insulin, they have the receptors on the cell membrane. So hormones are active molecules that bind to receptors on target organ, and they are secreted in low amounts and cause drastic changes in the body. And I mentioned that the hormones are circulating hormones. Between brackets, not all the hormones are circulating hormones. There are some local hormones secreted by special types of endocrine glands called autocrines and paracrines, will be discussed in later video. In our lesson today, we're going to specify three types of endocrine glands. In this picture, we see two types of endocrine glands, the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus. So we can see the hypothalamus is over here, and it's part of the brain. It's actually part of the nervous system. Special neurons are able to secrete hormones. This hormone go through a special duct called the hypothalamus pituitary duct and to the pituitary over here, and the pituitary is going to be affected by this hormone secreted by the hypothalamus. Over here we see that the female reproductive system, and I'm going to remind you, we can see the ovaries over here, we can see the fallopian tube over here, we can see the uterus over here, we can see the vagina. So I was just saying that the inner layer is called the endometrium, and here we're gonna move to the ovaries. So what are the ovaries? The ovaries are oval in shape and few centimeters, found at the level of the uterus, connected by ligaments. The job of the ovary is to produce and to protect the oocyte and produce the female hormones, and the secretion of the ovaries, the hormones secreted by the ovaries, are controlled by the previously mentioned endocrine glands, the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus. In this slide, we're going to see the 4 hormones secreted by the ovary: inhibin, relaxin, estrogen, and progesterone. Inhibin, it inhibits the follicle stimulating hormone released by the anterior pituitary, while relaxin is going to loosen the ligaments of the pelvis, allowing it to stretch during labor. And estrogen and progesterone are our 2 main hormones that we're going to discuss later. I'd like you students to pay attention. I've said that ovarian hormones, or the secretion of ovarian hormones, is controlled by the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus. And here you can see that the ovarian hormones also, and here you can see that the pituitary over here. Moving to estrogen and progesterone. So estrogen, it causes the development of breast and causes larger hips in females. It stimulates changes at the level of the endometrium, cervix, and vagina. At the level of the endometrium, it stimulates the superficial layer to start developing endometrium or uterine glands. So the superficial layer is going to thicken, and it's going to stimulate the production of the glands. They will appear like tube-like glands during the stimulation of estrogen. It's also going to stimulate the cervix, and so causes the glands in the cervix to change their secretion, and the mucus will become thin. So glands will start secreting thinner mucus. It also causes changes at the level of the vagina, where cells of the vagina undergo differentiation. As for progesterone, it also causes thickening of the endometrium, and it maintains the thickness of the endometrium, more specifically the superficial layer of the endometrium. It stimulates the endometrium gland, so it's going to cause the glands to start secreting. While estrogen stimulates the production of the gland, progesterone is going to stimulate the secretion of the gland. These glands, they don't secrete hormones, they secrete the nutritive material needed to nourish the baby in case of pregnancy. It also causes changes at the level of the mucus, and what it does is that it works opposite to estrogen. It causes the mucus of the cervix to become thick, so it causes a cervical plug. It also causes a slight high of the temperature, and it inhibits contraction, and we don't want contraction to take place in case of pregnancy, otherwise we might lose the baby to be. So after talking about the ovaries and the 4 hormones secreted by the ovary: inhibin, relaxin, estrogen, and progesterone, we're going to talk about the pituitary gland. This gland is called hypophysis because it's directly connected to the hypothalamus, as mentioned before, through a hypothalamo-pituitary duct. It is also known as a major gland because it has the ability to control other endocrine gland. We've just have an example where the pituitary gland is going to control another endocrine gland, the ovary. But what you need to know is that this pituitary gland is also controlled by the hypothalamus. And actually, it's not only controlled by the hypothalamus, but it is also controlled by hormones secreted of the glands that it targets. And we've just seen this example where the hormones secreted by the ovary are going to have a feedback and go back and control the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is a pea-sized oval shape, few centimeters, as you can see. We have to remember that the pituitary is made up of 2 parts, the anterior and the posterior part. What matters to us in this lesson is the anterior part. So I'd like to mention the TSH. Actually, I'd like to mention the TSH, which is a thyroid stimulating hormone, and as the name indicates, it's going to stimulate the thyroid gland, and the thyroid gland, when stimulated, it's going to release its thyroid hormones T3, T4. So this again showing that the anterior pituitary is a master gland, also having control on another endocrine gland, in this case the thyroid. Anyway, we're just going to focus on two main hormones, FSH and LH. As the name indicates, FSH is a follicle stimulating hormone, and it's going to stimulate the development of the follicles. Follicles are epithelial cells that are found around the oocyte, and we will explain in details in the other video folliculogenesis. What you need to know is that FSH is responsible for the change from a primary follicle to a secondary follicle to a cavitary follicle and to a Gravian follicle. Not only that, but it also stimulates the secretion of estrogen. Estrogen is secreted by the follicle and specifically by the theca interna and the granulosa of the follicle. LH, however, also affects the ovary, but it affects the corpus luteum in the ovary. It stimulates the change from a ruptured follicle after ovulation to corpus luteum, also known as yellow body. That's where the name comes from, luteinizing hormone, because it stimulates the production of corpus luteum. It also stimulates the secretion of estrogen and progesterone from this corpus luteum. And most importantly, a peak of LH is going to stimulate ovulation. As mentioned before, ovulation is the process where the oocyte is going to leave the ovary and go to the fallopian tube, allowing fertilization to take place if sperms were found. In this slide, you can see the two parts of the pituitary, anterior and posterior, and the hormones secreted by both. Just again, we're gonna only focus on FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and LH. In this slide, we can also see the target organs for these hormones, and we can understand how the anterior pituitary is considered a master gland. So it's able to control the thyroid, it's able to control the testes, the ovaries, and even the adrenal cortex, which are adrenal glands found over the kidneys. So to sum it up, what we need to know, we need to remember for menstrual cycle the following structure: hypothalamus that secretes GnRH hormone, anterior pituitary that secretes FSH and LH, and the ovaries that secrete estrogen and progesterone. I forgot to mention that FSH and LH are known as gonadotropin hormones. So these gonadotropin hormones will affect or control the gonads, the ovaries. And GnRH, as the name indicates, it's a gonadotropin releasing hormone. So this hormone controls the release of the gonadotropin hormones, which are the FSH and LH. So talking about the ovaries, we've got two different structures in the ovaries. The follicles will release estrogen, and the corpus luteum or the yellow body will release estrogen and progesterone. I didn't mention that before, but we also have the placenta that's also going to produce the progesterone, and in case of fertilization and pregnancy, we're going to have an embryo that's going to release a special hormone, human chorionic gonadotropin hormone. We're going to talk about later. So this is a super important slide that shows what happens. So you can see that the hypothalamus will control the anterior pituitary via gonadotropin releasing hormone that controls the two gonadotropin hormones, LH and FSH. LH and FSH in turn, they have receptor and on the ovary, and they're going to control the ovary, stimulate the ovary actually to produce two different type of hormones, estrogen and progesterone. These estrogen and progesterone, they will have receptor at the level of the uterus, and they're going to stimulate changes at the level of the uterus. Not only the uterus, we mentioned before, level changes uterus, endometrium of the uterus, the cervix of the uterus, and even the vagina. But this is the direct feedback. What I want you to remember is that estrogen and progesterone, they can also go back and affect the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus. I want you to remember that we have positive feedback. High amount of estrogen is going to cause a positive feedback on the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus. However, moderate amount of estrogen is going to cause a negative feedback, and estrogen and progesterone together is going to cause a negative feedback. So I want you to remember, estrogen, high amount of estrogen over here will cause a positive feedback, and estrogen and progesterone together. That's it in this video. I hope you enjoyed it and you find it useful. Stay tuned for other videos detailing the menstrual cycle. Have a good day.